She was crying in front of a hospital until a billionaire found her and said, "Come with me." The hospital window reflected a woman Mia no longer recognized. Her brown hair, once pulled back in a flawless bun, now fell loose over her shoulders, disheveled like the life that had collapsed in a matter of seconds. She remembered the leap, perfect, weightless, as if the stage were a cloud and she nothing but air. But the landing never came the way it should have. The sound of impact still echoed in her mind, mixed with the deathly silence that swept through the audience. Now, sitting in that wheelchair that still smelled like hospital, 26-year-old Mia Sullivan faced the reflection of a future she'd never imagined. And the worst part, she didn't know if she'd find the strength to face it. The tears fell hot and insistent, as if carrying with them every 5 a.m. rehearsal, every blister on her feet, every "one more time" shouted by the choreographer. She had built her entire identity on the ability to move, to float, to defy gravity on the tips of her toes. But now her feet didn't respond, didn't feel, didn't exist, except as a cruel reminder of everything she had been and would never be again. The full scholarship with the company, the cramped apartment she shared with 3 other dancers, the nights eating instant ramen to save money. It all seemed like a distant dream now, almost unreal, as if it belonged to someone else. Her phone buzzed in her lap. Messages. Dozens of them. "Get well soon. We're praying for you. You're strong. You'll get through this." Empty words that didn't pay rent, didn't give her job back, didn't rebuild a career destroyed in a single fall. Mia closed her eyes and breathed in the scent of the theater, that mix of varnished wood, sweat, and cheap perfume. She missed something that was still alive somewhere in the city, but had died for her that night. The stage would go on existing. Other dancers would keep dancing. The world would keep turning. Only she had stopped. Her mother, Rosa, had tried to comfort her earlier. "Mija, God has a purpose for everything." But what purpose could there be in destroying the only talent Mia possessed? What sense was there in stripping away the only form of expression she knew, the only language she was fluent in? Growing up poor in Philadelphia was hard enough, but dancing was the bridge between the forgotten neighborhood where she was born and the world of lights she'd so desperately wanted to reach. Now that bridge had collapsed, and Mia was suspended in air, with no ground beneath her feet, no destination in sight. Just emptiness, a vast emptiness that not even her mother's words could fill. She looked down at her own hands. They were still delicate, still held the elegance trained over years. But what good were graceful hands when her legs wouldn't follow? What use was perfect posture when her entire body refused to cooperate? Mia felt anger, a deep, visceral anger directed at herself. She should have checked the floor, should have asked to reschedule, but should have didn't change anything. The past was sealed, unchangeable, and the future? The future was a blank page she didn't know how to fill. Maybe she never would. Outside, the city carried on. Cars honking, people laughing, street vendors shouting deals, life happening as if nothing had changed. But for Mia, everything had changed. She was no longer a dancer, no longer the prodigy who'd climbed out of poverty to reach the stage. She was just a broken woman sitting in a wheelchair, staring at her own reflection in a window that showed her someone she didn't want to be. And worst of all, she had no idea who she could become now. She thought she'd never set foot in a theater again, and maybe that was the only certainty she had left. The afternoon light came through the recovery room window like an unwelcome intruder, illuminating every detail Mia preferred to keep in shadow. The hospital mattress, the bedside table with medications lined up like soldiers, the wheelchair folded in the corner. Everything there screamed dependence. Evelyn Hart, the physical therapist assigned to her case, adjusted the chair's brakes with precise, professional, almost mechanical movements. But there was something in her eyes, an old sadness, tucked away, that made Mia wonder what stories this woman carried. "Today we're going to try transferring from the bed to the chair," Evelyn said, her voice attempting cheerfulness, but sounding rehearsed to Mia's ears. As if anyone could get excited about the fact that the simple act of moving from one place to another now required assistance. The days dragged on with cruel slowness. Wake up, take meds, physical therapy session, bland lunch, more meds, involuntary nap, dinner, loneliness. The hospital routine was a prison of identical hours, where each morning was just a repeat of the one before. No surprises, no color, no music. Mia used to wake at 5 in the morning to stretch before rehearsals. Her body was a biological clock tuned to the discipline of dance. Now she woke at the same time, but there was nowhere to go, nothing to do. Just the white ceiling of the room staring back at her, indifferent to her despair. And that silence was deafening, without the sound of point shoes hitting the floor, without classical music echoing off the studio walls, without the nervous laughter of her colleagues before going on stage. Evelyn noticed things the doctors didn't see, the way Mia avoided looking at her own feet, how she turned her face away when anyone mentioned progress or future, how her hands trembled slightly whenever a nurse entered the room, not from fear, but from contained rage. "You know you can talk to me, right?" Evelyn offered one afternoon while massaging the muscles in Mia's legs. The answer was only silence, because what was there to say? That she felt like a broken musical instrument, incapable of producing the only melody she knew? That every night she dreamed she was dancing, and every morning waking up was like dying again? Some pain doesn't fit into words. Loneliness had a physical weight. Mia felt it in her shoulders, her chest, her throat. Friends from the company visited the first few weeks, bringing flowers, words of encouragement, promises of "we'll see you back soon." But the visits became more spread out, the messages shorter. They had rehearsals, performances, lives that kept moving while hers was frozen in that room. Mia didn't blame them. Actually, she preferred it this way. She couldn't bear to see in their eyes what she knew was there: pity, and worse still, relief. Relief that it hadn't been them, relief that they could still dance, feel, fly, while Mia was stuck there, watching the world spin through a window that seemed to get smaller every day. Rosa, her mother, came every day. She brought homemade food in plastic containers, fluffed the pillows, told stories from the neighborhood as if Mia were still part of that world. But Mia knew the truth. She didn't belong anywhere anymore. Not to the world of dance, which had spit her out without ceremony. Not to the poor neighborhood she came from, because she'd tasted a different life and now knew too much, wanted too much. Not here, in this hospital room that smelled of disinfectant and hopelessness. She was suspended between worlds, without roots, without wings. And the most frightening part? She was starting to wonder if she'd ever find a place where she could, finally, belong. Or if she'd spend the rest of her life like this, an eternal exile from herself. Evelyn noticed, even when Mia didn't say anything. Maybe because she carried her own scars. the loss of a brother in an accident years ago that left her with permanent guilt for not having been there. Seeing Mia in that wheelchair was like looking at the distorted reflection of her own pain. That's why Evelyn stayed. That's why she insisted. That's why she didn't give up even when Mia had clearly given up on herself. "Recovery isn't just physical," she said one day as the sun set outside. "It's learning to live again, even when everything seems to be over." Mia didn't respond, but something in those words kept echoing, like a musical note that refuses to disappear completely. Outside, beyond the glass fogged with condensation, a man silently watched the woman crying alone. He was there by chance, or maybe not. Maybe fate has a way of putting the right people in the right places, even when no one's looking for anything. Adam Evans didn't know it yet, but that image, the fragile silhouette against the golden afternoon light, shoulders curved under the invisible weight of loss, would be etched in his memory forever, and it would change everything. Philadelphia's fine rain had that subtle way of getting you wet. It wasn't a storm, wasn't dramatic, it was just water falling like silent tears from the gray sky. Mia sat parked at the hospital's side entrance, waiting for the accessible transport her mother had managed to schedule. The umbrella Rosa had left was propped against the chair, unused, because what was the point of protecting your head when your soul was already drenched? She watched the drops run down the asphalt, forming little rivers flowing toward the storm drains, and thought how easy it would be to just let herself be carried away too. Disappear. Vanish. Stop being this burden to everyone around her. That's when she heard the voice. Deep, careful, almost hesitant. "Are you okay?" Mia looked up and found a tall man in an impeccable suit that probably cost more than 6 months' rent in the apartment she no longer had. Dark hair combed back, brown eyes that carried an almost uncomfortable seriousness, and that upright posture of someone used to commanding boardrooms. Adam Evans, though she didn't know his name yet, was exactly the type of person Mia had learned to avoid. People from another world, where problems were solved with money, and tragedies were just distant news on television. "I'm fine," she answered curtly, turning her gaze back to the street. But he didn't move. He stayed there, standing in the rain that was now soaking his expensive suit, as if waiting for something. Or maybe as if he didn't quite know what to do. "Sorry, I didn't mean to bother you," he said, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that revealed more nervousness than his rigid posture suggested. "It's just, I saw you here alone, and I thought—" He stopped, as if realizing how strange that sounded. Mia turned her face toward him, one eyebrow raised in suspicion. What did he think? That I needed charity? That I was some social project waiting to be saved? "What did you think?" she shot back, her voice carrying a hardness that years of poverty had taught her to use as armor. Adam swallowed hard. He was used to negotiating million-dollar contracts, facing ruthless investors, but something in those green eyes, angry, wounded, proud, completely disarmed him. He could have walked away. Should have, really. Any sensible person would have realized they weren't welcome and gone on their way. But Adam Evans wasn't exactly sensible in that moment. He was someone who just left another medical appointment to treat chronic insomnia that no medication could cure, another session where the psychiatrist tried to make him admit that success wasn't synonymous with happiness. And maybe because of that, maybe because he was tired of living on autopilot, he persisted. "I thought you looked like you could use some help, and I thought that if you'd let me, I'd like to offer it." Simple as that. No beating around the bush, no false promises, just a raw, honest offer, almost desperate, though he didn't quite understand why himself. Mia laughed, a short, bitter laugh, utterly humorless. "Help," she repeated, as if tasting the word and finding it sour. And what do you think I need? Money? Pity? A motivational story to make me feel better? The words came out hard, cutting, but beneath them was so much fear. Fear of trusting, fear of accepting, fear of discovering that even kindness had a price. Adam didn't back away. On the contrary, he took a step forward, crouching down slightly to be at eye level with her. "I don't know what you need," he admitted, his voice low but steady. "But I know you shouldn't be out here alone, in the rain, waiting for something that's clearly late. So I'm offering a ride, hot coffee, or just silence, if that's what you prefer. No strings attached, no ulterior motives." There was something about the way he spoke, without that typical condescension of someone who has everything talking to someone who has nothing, that made Mia hesitate. She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. She saw the faint dark circles under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the loneliness he tried to hide behind the perfect suit and measured words, and she recognized it. Because loneliness called to loneliness, pain recognized pain, even when they wore completely different clothes. "Why do you care?" she asked, quieter now, the anger giving way to something more vulnerable. Curiosity, maybe, or just exhaustion from carrying everything alone. Adam smiled, a small, sad smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Honestly, I don't know, but it's been a long time since I've really cared about anything, and this felt important." She didn't know if she'd accept the gesture or run away again. But as the rain kept falling and the accessible transport didn't arrive, Mia Sullivan found herself doing something she'd sworn never to do again: trust a stranger, even if just for today, even if just to find out whether genuine kindness still existed in the world, or if it was all just another illusion waiting to crumble. Adam Evans' penthouse looked like it had been pulled from an architecture magazine, floor-to-ceiling windows revealing the city lit up like a sea of earthbound stars, minimalist furniture that screamed expensive in every straight line, and a silence Mia had never experienced before. It wasn't the suffocating silence of the hospital, nor the noisy silence of the neighborhood where she grew up, where thin walls let through every couple's argument, every baby's cry, every television blaring at maximum volume. This was a clean silence, almost artificial, as if even sounds knew they didn't belong there without an invitation. She sat on the Italian leather sofa, the wheelchair discreetly folded in a corner, and felt completely out of place, a stain of reality on an abstract painting too perfect to be true. Adam brought tea, not coffee like he'd offered before, chamomile tea, because he'd noticed how her hands trembled slightly and figured caffeine wouldn't help. Small gestures like this became frequent in the following weeks. He learned that she preferred curtains closed in the morning because direct light hurt her eyes, still sensitive from the medications, that she avoided full-length mirrors, that she always looked at people's feet when talking, a strange habit he didn't understand but respected. Mia, in turn, learned that Adam woke at 3 in the morning almost every night and stood on the balcony watching the city sleep, that he called his father once a week and the conversation never lasted more than 5 minutes, that there was an entire room in the apartment locked up, filled with his mother's things from years ago, and that he hadn't gone in there since the funeral. "You don't have to do this, you know," Mia said one night when he returned with another bag of books she'd mentioned wanting to read. Guilt weighed in her chest like a stone. She had no way to reciprocate, no way to pay him back, had nothing but her problematic presence taking up space in a world that wasn't hers. Adam sat in the armchair across from her, elbows resting on his knees, that posture she'd come to recognize as his vulnerable mode. "I know I don't have to," he answered, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart race in ways she wasn't ready to name. "But I want to, and it's been a long time since I've really wanted anything, so please, let me want this." It was on one of those nights, with the distant sound of the city mixed with the comfortable silence they'd built together, that Adam finally asked. He'd been avoiding it, respecting her space, but curiosity, or maybe something deeper, a genuine need to know her beyond the surface, won out. "What was your dream?" he asked gently. "Before the accident, what did you want most?" Mia tensed. That question always hurt because the answer seemed ridiculous now, unreachable, even childish. But there was something about the way Adam waited, without pressure, without judgment, just pure interest that made her consider it. She took a deep breath, and then, for the first time, she put into words the most secret desire she carried. "I didn't want to be the best dancer," she began, her voice hesitant, eyes fixed on her own hands. "It was never about fame or recognition. I wanted to sit in the last row of some theater and watch ordinary people react to ballet." She looked up, checking if he was laughing at her. But Adam was completely serious, absorbing every word. People who never had money for tickets, kids from forgotten neighborhoods like mine, families who think art is for rich people, for different people. I wanted to see the magic happening in their eyes, because I was that person. Her voice trembled. "I was 12 years old when I saw ballet for the first time, a free performance at the community center. And it was like discovering there was a language my heart spoke fluently without ever having learned it." Adam was silent for a long moment. It wasn't the awkward silence of someone who doesn't know what to say, but the silence of someone genuinely moved, processing something important. Mia braced herself for the usual responses. "How beautiful. You'll achieve it another way." All the empty phrases that meant nothing. But what Adam said surprised her completely. "What if we made it happen?" She blinked, confused. "Made what happen?" He leaned forward, his eyes shining with something she hadn't seen there before. Purpose. Free performances, city theaters, underserved communities. We organize it, I finance it, and you sit with me in the last row, and we watch together the magic. She didn't know if she could believe it, if this was real or just another beautiful promise that would disappear with daylight. But when Adam extended his hand, not to lift her up, not to save her, but to invite her to build something together, Mia realized that maybe, just maybe, there was still room for dreams different from the ones she'd lost. Maybe true love wasn't about returning to what was, but about creating something new from the pieces. And maybe for the first time since the accident, she was ready to try. He began planning something she would never dare ask for, and as he did, without realizing it, he was also starting to fall in love. Not with the idea of her, not with the tragic story, but with the green-eyed woman who saw beauty where no one else looked, with the way she bit her lower lip when thinking, with the way she smiled, shyly but genuinely, when he showed her the first theater that had agreed to host the free performance. The morning news turned the penthouse coffee into poison. Mia was alone. Adam had left early for a meeting, when the television she never turned on suddenly came to life, programmed to display the local news. And there she was. Her face, her full name, old images of her performances alongside recent photos taken by paparazzi she didn't even know existed. The ballerina who captured the heart and fortune of one of Pennsylvania's wealthiest men, the anchor announced, with that yellow smile of someone delivering gossip disguised as journalism. But the worst came next, an interview. Victor Evans, Adam's father, seated in his imposing office, expressions serious, words measured like surgical strikes. "My son has too generous a heart," he said, each syllable dripping with condescension. "And opportunistic people know how to exploit that." Mia felt the ground collapse for the second time in her life. Only this time, there was no stage, no audience witnessing it, just her, alone, watching her life dissected on television like a crime case. They'd investigated everything. Showed images of the neighborhood where she grew up, broken streets, cramped houses, poverty exposed as evidence of wrongdoing. Interviewed neighbors who said too much, former colleagues from the company who dropped vague comments open enough to be interpreted in the worst way. She was always ambitious, one said, knew what she wanted, another added. As if ambition were a sin, as if wanting to escape poverty were a crime. And the narrative took shape, built stone by people who'd never gone to bed hungry, who'd never had to choose between eating or paying for the bus. Her phone exploded, calls from unknown numbers, messages from journalists requesting interviews, social media accounts she didn't even know existed, now filled with cruel comments. Gold digger, user, manipulator. The words danced across the screen like sharp knives, each one cutting away a different piece of the dignity she'd been trying to rebuild. Some even suggested the accident had been staged, a strategy to elicit pity and attract wealthy men's attention. The creativity of human cruelty had no limits. Mia turned off her phone, closed the curtains, curled up on the sofa, and let the tears come, not from sadness, but from anger. Anger at having been foolish enough to believe she could belong in this world. Anger at having let her guard down. Anger at having dared to dream again. Adam arrived mid-afternoon, his face stricken. He already knew, of course he knew. The news segment wasn't random, it was orchestrated. Victor Evans did nothing without purpose. And the purpose here was clear: destroy the relationship before it became too serious, before it compromised the family's image, before the carefully built empire was tainted by a love story that crossed class boundaries. "Mia, I'm so sorry," Adam began, words tumbling out in urgency. "I didn't know my father would do this. I already talked to him. But she raised her hand, stopping him. The green eyes that once sparkled were now dull, distant, as if she'd already left even while still physically present. "You knew this would happen," she said, her voice frighteningly calm. "Maybe not exactly like this, not now, but you knew. People like me don't end up with people like you, not in movies, not in real life. It was naive of me to forget that." Adam tried to move closer, but she pulled back, and that movement, so small, so simple, broke something inside him. "That's not true," he insisted, voice heavy with desperation. "What we have is real. What I feel for you is..." "Is what, Adam?" she interrupted, her voice finally cracking. "Love? Passion? You think that's enough? Look around. Look what they're saying about me. I'm the villain in this story. The user, the poor girl who seduced the rich prince. And you know the worst part? Part of me believes them." She began gathering her few things, clothes Adam had bought because hers no longer fit in a penthouse closet, books he'd given her, small objects that had accumulated meaning over the months. Each item placed in the bag was a silent goodbye, an acknowledgement that fairy tales don't exist outside of pages. Adam stood in the middle of the room, completely lost. A man used to solving everything with money and influence, discovering he couldn't buy what mattered most. "Where are you going?" he asked, voice choked. Mia didn't answer right away. She closed the bag, smoothed her skirt, assumed that upright posture years of ballet had taught. Pride, always pride, even when the whole world is collapsing. "Home," she finally said, pushing the chair toward the door. "To the place I should never have left." Adam blocked her path, desperate. "Mia, please, we can work this out. I'll make a public statement. I'll cut ties with my father if necessary. But she shook her head, a sad smile on her lips. "You don't have to. You have a life here, a family, an empire, a legacy, and I'm just a broken ballerina who forgot her place." She moved past him, and Adam didn't have the courage to stop her. He just watched, helpless, as she crossed through the door and disappeared down the hallway. She left without looking back, carrying only the echo of the last performance, the one they'd watched together from the last row of the small community theater where a 7-year-old girl had cried seeing a pas de deux for the first time, eyes wide with wonder. Mia remembered how Adam had squeezed her hand in that moment, how he'd whispered, "You made this happen," and how for the first time since the accident, she'd felt her life still had purpose. But now, descending in the mirrored elevator that reflected 1,000 versions of the woman she didn't want to be, Mia understood the cruel truth. Some worlds were never meant to touch, and trying to force that connection only resulted in mutual destruction. The cracked sidewalk of the neighborhood where Mia grew up seemed smaller than she remembered. Or maybe she had grown. Not in height, not in glory, but in that painful way only loss teaches. Her mother's cramped apartment smelled of cinnamon and old coffee, a scent that used to mean home, but now felt merely like a memory of a version of herself that no longer existed. Rosa didn't ask questions. She just opened her arms, and Mia collapsed there, crying in a way she hadn't cried since childhood, deep, visceral, not caring about appearances or pride. "I'm good for nothing, Mom," she sobbed between breaths. "I can't dance, I can't love, I can't even belong anywhere." Rosa just stroked her hair with that infinite patience of mothers who've seen too much and know that words don't always heal, but presence does. The days that followed were slow, dragging as if time had turned to thick syrup. Mia spent hours at the second-floor window watching the street. Kids playing ball, street vendors shouting deals, neighbors gossiping on the sidewalks. Life happening in simple ways without the complications that money and desire had brought. And strangely, there was comfort in that. It wasn't the life she'd dreamed of, wasn't the lit stage or the apartment with a city view, but it was real, tangible, without masks. Here, no one pretended she was anything other than what she was. A woman who used to be a dancer, who had loved and lost, who was trying to figure out who she could be now. And maybe that was enough. Or maybe she was just convincing herself of that because the alternative, continuing to want the impossible, hurt too much. It was on an ordinary Tuesday, overcast, that the impossible knocked on the door. Literally. Mia heard her mother answer, heard the deep voice she would recognize anywhere, and felt her heart race before even seeing him. And then there he was, Adam Evans, in a wrinkled suit, disheveled hair, deep dark circles as if he hadn't slept in days, completely out of place in that narrow hallway, between peeling walls and the smell of a neighbor's cooking, but there nonetheless. He held a leather folder in his hands, fingers white from gripping it so tightly, and when his eyes met hers, there was something different in them. No longer the hesitant uncertainty of a rich man trying to help, but the firm determination of someone who finally knew what he wanted and was willing to pay any price for it. "I resigned," were his first words. Direct, no beating around the bush. Mia blinked, confused. Resigned from what? Adam entered the small apartment, each movement seeming to take up too much space, but at the same time belonging exactly there because she was there. He placed the leather folder on the scratched coffee table, and "I brought this." Mia opened it slowly. Documents, many of them. Contracts, transfers, detailed projects. Her eyes scanned the pages without fully understanding, but some words jumped out. Permanent program. Community ballet, underserved communities, artistic director, Mia Sullivan, and numbers, lots of numbers, amounts she didn't even know how to pronounce. "What is this?" she asked, her voice coming out weaker than intended. Adam knelt in front of her chair, not in a condescending gesture, but to be at the same height, eyes on the same level, human to human. "It's proof that I choose you, not the idea of you, not the beautiful story, not the redemption project. You. Mia Sullivan, the woman who taught me there's beauty in watching magic through the eyes of people who never had anything, who reminded me that money doesn't buy purpose. He took a deep breath, his voice trembling slightly. I created a foundation, independent of my family, with part of my personal fortune. It will fund free ballet performances in underserved communities throughout Philadelphia, and I want you to direct it, to choose the venues, the companies, to make sure the last row is always filled with people like you once were. Mia shook her head, tears already streaming. Adam, you don't have to do this. You don't have to prove anything. It's not about proving, he interrupted, taking her hands in his. It's about building, about taking everything that happened, the accident, the pain, the humiliation, the distance, and transforming it into something that matters, something that lasts, something that puts beauty where it should have always been, within everyone's reach. He released one of her hands and pulled something from his pocket, a small velvet box. Nothing ostentatious, nothing that screamed wealth, simple, delicate, like everything he'd learned that truly mattered. And I want to do this by your side, as your partner, as your husband, if you'll let me. Not because I'm saving you, not because you need me, but because we're better together than apart. The silence that followed was heavy with possibilities. Rosa watched from the kitchen, discreetly wiping tears with her apron. A car honked outside. A child shouted playing ball. Life kept happening around them, indifferent to the moment that would change everything. Mia looked at the man kneeling on the metaphorical sidewalk of her world, because that's what he was doing, coming here, giving up the empire, proving with actions, not words, that true love descends, doesn't demand the other climb up. Are you sure? She whispered, because even now, even with all the evidence, part of her still didn't believe. You know people will talk, that your family will. Let them talk, Adam cut in, his voice firm. Let them judge. Let them write whatever they want. I choose you. Today, tomorrow, always. And then in that tiny apartment where expensive furniture didn't fit but true love did, Mia Sullivan said yes. Not because she needed to be saved, not because she sought financial security, but because she finally understood that belonging wasn't about place, it was about person. It was about finding someone willing to cross worlds, to challenge empires, to sit in the last row and watch the magic with the same wonder-filled eyes. And when Adam kissed her there on the worn sofa in the cramped living room, with her mother crying tears of joy in the kitchen and the noise from the street coming through the open window, Mia was certain she had finally come home. And home, she discovered, wasn't an address. It was a heart that beat in rhythm with hers. In the last row of the neighborhood church, weeks later, love applauded in silence. There were no reporters, no photographers fighting for angles, no guests with important last names, just people, neighbors who'd watched Mia grow up, children she'd taught their first ballet steps at the community center, mothers who worked 2 shifts and took the afternoon off to witness that fairy tales do exist, only they're rarely like the books tell them. And when Mia came down the aisle, not walking, but being guided by her mother, the chair decorated with simple flowers from the market, every person standing in that church knew they were seeing something rare. Not a happy ending, but an honest new beginning. And maybe that was even more beautiful. 6 months later, Mia sat exactly where she'd always dreamed of being, in the last row of a small theater in North Philadelphia, watching the audience, not the dancers, the audience. A girl, maybe 9 years old, sitting 3 rows ahead, had wide eyes, mouth half open in pure fascination, as she watched a grand jeté cross the stage, as if defying gravity. Mia recognized that look. It was the same one she'd had at 12, when she discovered there was a language her heart understood, without ever having learned it. Adam gently squeezed her hand, and she looked at him, the man who chose to step down from his glass world to build bridges instead of walls. "Do you see?" she whispered, discreetly pointing to the girl. "She'd just discovered who she is." And Adam smiled, that smile she'd learned to love, full of tenderness and complicity, just like us. Life rarely happens like in scripts. Mia never returned to professional dancing. Her feet never regained movement. But she discovered there are other ways to create beauty, other ways to make magic happen. As director of the Last Row Foundation, she ensured that every month children from forgotten communities had free access to ballet, to dance, to art that transforms. And every performance, without fail, she was there, in the last row, watching not the stage, but the reactions, the eyes that sparkled, the involuntary smiles and discreet tears of adults discovering it's never too late to be moved by beauty. Just as she discovered that love can change everything, each of us also carries this power of transformation within ourselves. Not in the grandness of gestures, but in the daily choice to look at another person and see not what's missing, but what's most human and true. Stories like this remind us it's never too late to start over and believe in love. That the most painful falls can become the most beautiful new beginnings. That belonging isn't about addresses or bank accounts, but about finding someone willing to sit beside you and watch life happen, not as a distant spectacle, but as a shared experience. Mia learned that her greatest strength was never dancing perfectly, but seeing beauty where others saw only poverty and limitation. And Adam learned that true wealth isn't in glass towers, but in hearts that beat in the same rhythm, even when they come from completely different worlds. Real love isn't the kind from movies where everything resolves easily. It's the kind that crosses storms, that faces judgment, that chooses to stay even when leaving would be easier. It's the kind that builds, brick by brick, a life that honors both the past and the future. Mia and Adam didn't erase their differences. They continued to exist, sometimes causing discomfort, sometimes requiring difficult conversations. But they learned these differences could be bridges instead of chasms, that two worlds can coexist when there's respect, when there's genuine willingness to understand instead of judge, when there's enough love to make the difficult seem possible. If this story touched you, if it echoed in some corner of your heart that has also felt like it didn't belong anywhere, or that has loved against all expectations, or that has had to choose between pride and vulnerability, write in the comments, "Love transforms lives." Because it's true, it transforms. Not in the magical, instant way of fairy tales, but in the slow, deep, and permanent way of real choices. And every time we choose to believe, even after all the disappointments, we're participating in that transformation. We're saying yes to the possibility that the best is still to come. Subscribe to Eternal Romance Stories and experience, with each episode, emotions that warm the soul and reflections that transform the heart, because everyone deserves stories that remind us love exists, not as fantasy, but as a daily choice, not as inevitable destiny, but as careful construction, not as a magical solution to all problems, but as a force that helps us face whatever comes together. Stories that make us believe it's worth continuing to try, continuing to love, continuing to hope, not naively, but courageously. And this was just one of many stories that will still move you here. Because as long as there are people willing to choose love despite fear, as long as there are hearts brave enough to cross different worlds, as long as there's someone willing to sit in the last row and watch the magic through the eyes of those who never had anything, there will always be a new story to tell.